Lorne Brown here with healthyseminars.com, and I'm with Matthew Bauer from the ANF, the Acupuncture Now Foundation. Now, Matthew, you have had a paper published recently, Is Acupuncture Dose Dependent? Ramifications of Acupuncture Treatment Dose Within Clinical Practice in Trials. Can you share with us what you have found with this research and the ramifications for the profession?
Yes, well, thank you for having me, Lauren. And well, yes, I think you can really sum it up with a question that we ask in the paper is, if acupuncture wasn't dose dependent, then there'd never be a reason to do more than one acupuncture treatment. So I think everybody recognizes that for vast majority of patients, especially with chronic conditions, there is a need to do more than one treatment. So then the question is, how many treatments are needed to either get some initial benefit or to try to reach the maximum benefit? And what we're pointing out is that these kind of questions aren't being clearly defined in research, and it's causing an underestimation about how effective acupuncture can be. And this underestimation of acupuncture's effectiveness is having a huge impact on slowing acupuncture's acceptance, especially within mainstream institutions like government agencies or insurance companies.
So was that part of the reason where you started to look into this? Because there's a lot of research on acupuncture, and as you're suggesting, the effectiveness was being understated based on the dosaging of the treatments. So you wanted to see how this is impacting, and if we get the dosaging right, then we could probably see it, the effectiveness better. And is that kind of what motivated this research?
That's exactly right. You know, I came in really late to this, starting to look at and get interested in research, and it comes from my interest in seeing that acupuncture is being used to its fullest potential. And when I started to pay attention to research about 15 years ago, you know, I'd see these studies and we'd see these effectiveness rates in the 40, 50, maybe 60% range. And I'm like, gee, what are they doing wrong that they're only getting, you know, 50% effectiveness for these kind of patients? If I was only getting that in my clinic, I would really be concerned. So as I started to actually look at studies, one of the first things I'd look at is say, how many treatments did they do? And I was really pretty stunned to see the range of different treatment numbers that are being done in different studies to treat the same condition. And it's like, wait a second, how is that? It makes sense. I mean, if they're trying to get to the answer the question about how effective is acupuncture for treating XYZ conditions, and we see these huge variations in the number of treatments and the frequency of the treatments, well, then it's obvious that the researchers aren't on the same page about how to go about asking and answering those questions, especially when you look at how they do acupuncture in China, a place that apparently knows something about this. And there they like to treat every day or every other day in the beginning, and they often do dozens of treatments. Where here, we're seeing so many research studies where they're doing one treatment a week for maybe 6 times or so, and then drawing conclusions about how effective or how ineffective acupuncture is. And it just makes no sense. To me, it's the elephant in the room. Either the Chinese are badly over-treating their patients, or we are really under-treating our patients. And that's, that's the type of question we want to explore.
And if you think of it from a pharmaceutical perspective, if somebody's taking, say, a type of antidepressant or an antibiotic, they don't say, for most of them, take it once a week, take it every day for 7 days or 10 days, and then they kind of reassess, right? So
well,
for antidepressant, you take it every day. So with the acupuncture, I have 2 parts I want to ask you. I have a question about what you saw as kind of an average dosing. Like, is there an average dosage you found? And I will let, just for the listeners know, this isn't the first study of this kind in a sense. I think of 2 people related to fertility. Lee Hollander Rubin did research, and she called it whole systems acupuncture, and showing in an IVF setting success rate, live birth rates. And I think her number came to somewhere around 11 or 12 treatments were needed over a period of time to get those results, rather than just treating on IVF transfer day. So
Right.
just transfer day, one treatment versus a series of treatment leading up to it, there was a statistical difference in pregnancy and live birth rates. And then Mike Armour, they published in late 2019, his group, they looked at some meta-analysis and other data also on acupuncture and IVF, and they also showed it was dosage dependent. So depending on how many treatments were given leading up to the transfer impacted the pregnancy rate, live birth rate. And I got to just share it because some people may be interested in that. Mike Armour does have a class on healthy seminars, as does Lee Rubin. Mike Armour's course is called The Importance of Acupuncture Dose in Treatment of IVF Protocols on Healthy Seminars. So there are people researching this, and this is what you've also are sharing. What is kind of like, people often will do once a week, every other week, twice a week. What are you seeing based on the research and based on what they're doing in China would be recommended, say, for pain and injuries, or is it really disease specific?
Well, of course, it's not only going to be disease specific, but it's going to be individual with the disease specific. When it really comes to clinical, and I want to make clear that there's a difference here between when we talk about what individual practitioners do in their clinics and what researchers are doing to draw conclusions that are basically forming a judgment on how effective acupuncture is. That's a completely different topic, because in practice, of course, there's all sorts of factors that impact how many treatments you may be able to do with the patient. But in research that's trying to ask and answer the question, how effective is acupuncture for treating this condition, that research should be set up to give acupuncture every reasonable chance to be as effective as it could be. And that's what we're saying, is that's not happening. So we take a pretty unique tact here, a way of trying to put it in perspective. And we introduce a type of way of looking at acupuncture dosage question that most people are not familiar with, including researchers. And that is, we use the example of what's done in US style managed care insurance when it comes to what they call utilization management. And what we mean by that is the insurance companies that work under managed care, they have utilization management guidelines. They are legally obligated to provide treatment that evidence suggests that it would be beneficial to their policyholders. They are not obligated to provide treatment for that evidence would suggest is not going to be beneficial for their policyholders. So insurance companies go through a process to try to decide, especially for treatments like physical therapy, chiropractic, acupuncture therapy, how many treatments are we obligated to pay for XYZ conditions? And they will go through this process to determine how many treatments will it take to see some initial level of benefit, to show that the treatment is doing some good. And how many treatments will it take to reach what they call maximum therapeutic benefit, MTB, meaning you've gotten as much good out of the treatment as you're going to get. Those two benchmarks are what they use to determine what they're legally obligated to pay for. So what we did is we found a utilization management guideline. Now, most of the times these guidelines are proprietary to the insurance companies, but there was a utilization management guideline that was available online. And so we use that to show, and this comes from Optum Healthcare, which is a kind of, not an insurance company, but a kind of technology company that works with insurance companies. They develop things like utilization management guidelines that then other insurance companies can utilize. And what they said when it comes to chronic pain condition, musculoskeletal pain conditions, is that it can take 2 to 6 weeks to see the initial level of benefit. And it can take, usually, if there is some benefit, it usually takes at least 6 to 12 weeks to reach maximum benefit. And then if there's any flare-ups, it can take up to 3 weeks to have to resolve those flare-ups. Now, they didn't list the treatment numbers, but typically in the US, physical therapy, chiropractic care is going to be doing more than one treatment a week. So we use this as a guideline to say, these are the treatment numbers that insurance companies in the US could be legally obligated to provide, because they have to worry about, are we paying for treatment that's not working? Or are we pulling the plug too soon on the treatment, and then we can actually, get into trouble with regulators saying, here your policyholders didn't get the care they needed. So we use those numbers.
Where can they download this paper so they can read it? And then what do you want the profession to do with this?
Right. Well, we, the paper is in our footnotes, in our list of references in our paper. And our paper is in the March issue at the Integrative Medicine Research, which is an open access paper. We definitely wanted to go with an open access journal. So you'll be able to read all about the Optum maximum therapeutic benefit utilization management guideline in there, and it does have that reference in our paper. And the main thing we're trying to do is reach out to the research community, and we give specific recommendations for what needs to happen here. And that is that first of all, the research community really needs to kind of look at how trials are designed, and if a trial is going to talk about how effective acupuncture is, the effectiveness rate, then the trial needs to be designed in a way that allows it to be as effective as it could be. And if a trial is not trying to see how effective acupuncture could be, but is asking a limited question, like, for example, we give this example, there was a study done on for shoulder pain using a distal point, stomach 38, a point on the shin. Now, this was a trial that was only trying to look at how does this point really work to ease shoulder pain? So they did one needle, 1 point, stomach 38 on the same side, the ipsilateral side, whatever side the shoulder pain was on. They did 3 treatments. So, and they said in this paper that they were not, now the paper did find that using this one acupuncture point was effective for reducing shoulder pain. But they said, deep in the paper, they said, now if we would have used local points, we would have been more effective. So in the gap between the real and the sham acupuncture would have been greater. But this trial was used in the Acupuncture Trialist Collaboration in their attempt to determine what is the effect size of acupuncture for chronic pain, including shoulder pain. So our point there is, a lot of these trials that are being looked at to say how effective is acupuncture, the trials weren't even designed to ask and answer that question. It was a trial, this was a trial, how effective is this one acupuncture point if you use it 3 times? And so one of the things we're calling for is there needs to be better clarity in reporting what a trial is setting out to answer, the question it's setting out to answer. There's no reporting guideline to say whether a trial is trying to see about acupuncture to reach its maximum benefit, or whether it's trying to look at how does acupuncture do when we do it this way in a limited way. And that's something that needs to be clarified, because what happens is when they do these systematic reviews and they take a bunch of trials, some of those trials weren't trying to find out how effective acupuncture could be. It was only how effective is acupuncture when done this way. And they should not be used in research trials that are trying to determine acupuncture's full effect size. And this is happening all the time. That's what happened in England or in the UK when their National Health Service stopped paying for acupuncture for chronic low back pain. They had determined that the research would have to show that it passed a certain threshold of how effective it was, an effectiveness rate. And it didn't quite make that effectiveness rate, so they pulled it out. But 2 of the trials in their review only used 1 treatment.
So we're talking here that it's dose dependent. It reminds me of an anecdotal story here where I had a woman that came in with back pain, and she had seen somebody once a week for 7 weeks, and she didn't get relief. And it's months later, and she came to my clinic, and I had her come in 3 times a week for the first 2 weeks, and then once on the third week. And by the end of the second week, she had, fairly almost all gone. And she said, I don't think you're doing anything different. This is familiar. She doesn't know the points, but the points are on the back, and she remembers the back of the knee. And I said, yeah, the acupuncturist points that they use were probably right on. It's the frequency of treatment or the dosage of treatment that makes a difference. With laser research, I'm known for using laser in my practice, and people say I've tried laser, and they go once a week for laser. We already know in the laser research, it's at the beginning, it's 3 times a week for 1 to 2 weeks, and then you can spread it out. You need to give, I always say, you got to kickstart the body's innate ability to heal. You need to get on top of this, and then you can reduce your treatments. And it sounds like what the research has been, to summarize what you've shared, is we have been understating the effectiveness of acupuncture based on the dosage we're using it. It's time to revisit that and check out the A&F, because they got lots of information on this, and this paper came out. And for those that are interested, as I mentioned, Lee and Mike Armour, Lee Hollander Rubin, Mike Armour, they have 2 classes on using it from a condition specific, but they do talk about why dosage is important in that as well.
I hope at least to get people engaged to discuss this, but one of the things we're saying is, I don't know if you're familiar with the guideline, the reporting guideline they call STRICTA.
Go ahead, yeah. Okay.
Well, we're saying, look, these studies are not really, there's no reporting guideline for researchers to clearly state whether their study was intended to measure acupuncture's maximum effectiveness or if they're using it for a limited condition. And so that's one of the very, very specific recommendations we have, is that guideline should go in STRICTA. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that we would have systematic reviews being done of research mixing limited studies with studies trying to reach the potential maximum effectiveness. So that's something very concrete that they could get behind, because a lot of the people involved with SAR are the people involved in the STRICTA guideline. And that right there would be a huge step forward, just to add that to STRICTA. But really, it's about raising awareness that, the acupuncture trialist collaboration reached the conclusion that the research was not systematically underestimating acupuncture's effectiveness. We absolutely 100% disagree with that. And one of the things that we pointed out with acupuncture trialist collaboration is they had 29 trials, then they added 10, made 39 trials with 30,000 people. But when you looked at the trial data on that, only half of the people in those studies actually had their treatment numbers reported. So it's like researchers seem to care so little about the frequency of the dosage, or the dosage, the frequency of the treatment, that the studies that they gathered, which they considered to be high quality studies, only 50% of the subjects did the researchers even know how many treatments they got. I mean, you'd never see anything like that in a drug study. It's like, come on, people. So we just, honestly, this I believe this is way bigger than raising awareness about the problems with sham acupuncture, because this is about not just sham trials, but this is about all trials, and all trials moving forward. We have to fix these problems, or we'll continue to underestimate how effective acupuncture is.
Thank you very much for taking the time to get this paper together and sharing your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you, Lorne. I really appreciate your help in getting the word out.
All right, so check in, I don't know if it's above, below, to the left or right, but there should be the Acupuncture Now Foundation, the A&F website there, so you can go there, find out some more information. And then the Healthy Seminars link hopefully is on here as well if you're interested in some of those courses. Matthew, keep up the great work. And again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorne. We'll talk again. Bye now.
you.